We're going to focus on the social sort of meaning of eating together, why we do this. And actually, what makes this really exciting is that eating together might be what differs us, humans, from other hungry animals on this planet. Have you thought of that? So, I would like you to welcome our panel here. First of all, we have Christiane Nüsslein-Volhard. An applause to her. This is, until recently, she was director of the Max Planck Institute of Developmental Biology at Tübingen in Germany. She's doing research on the complexity of life in the cell. She's doing genetic research. You used to do it on fruit flies. Nowadays, zebrafish, I've understood. So soon you will be covering the human being as well. We don't know. She was awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine or Physiology 1995. And she's back here with us today. The next distinguished guest here, another applause. Welcome back.
Thank you.
She has also written a book, but we'll come back to that later. Many laureates do that, but this is a cliffhanger. So, please, Professor Richard Wrangham. He has also written books, of course, and this one is called Catching Fire. So please give him a warm hand. Catching Fire. He's a professor of biological anthropology at Harvard University. You studied zoology. Why is this so hard? Zoology about animals. Cambridge, UK. And since 30 years back, this guy has followed wild chimpanzees in Kibale National Park in Uganda and studied their behavior. And he's, of course, very interested in how we became humans. So that will be something. Last but not least, Claude Fischler. This is the sociologist and anthropologist of the panel, expert on commensality. Do you know what that is? Most of you are Swedish, but perhaps you know Latin. The word mensa, meaning table. So, common table, sit together. Isn't it, Claude? I'm right now. Commensality is eating together. And you have been director of the Interdisciplinary Institute for Contemporary Anthropology in Paris, until recently, and also he was the research director of the National Research Center of France. So there we are. And first of all, talking about commensality, I would like to ask you actually, with hands up now, how many of you had dinner last night with your family screen-free? Sitting down by a dinner table, eating together, no screens. Not by the telly, not checking your emails. Oh, okay. You will change your mind after this session, ladies and gentlemen. So, please, may I start with you, Richard, because this about catching fire, the way we managed to do that 2 million years ago, wasn't it? And how this sort of changed not only the nutrients in the meat that actually made us be able to take more nutrients from the meat, so we could do other things than catching meat. Isn't that one of the benefits of catching the fire?
Yeah, I mean, so far today we've been talking entirely about food production. We haven't talked about food preparation at all. And it's only recently that people have realized that the way in which we cook has extraordinary impacts on the nutrients. And we still know relatively little about it, but how much extra energy do we get from cooking our food? It's something around maybe 30%, 50% extra calories net. And this is odd because if you look at global sources of information about foods, and you ask yourself the question, for foods that are eaten possibly raw or possibly cooked, what does the USDA website or any other website tell us about how many calories we get? And the answer typically is slightly fewer if we eat it raw. Sorry, slightly fewer if we eat it cooked.
Cooked, yeah.
And this
you
is
were
wrong.
just testing us there, if we were listening.
Thank you, exactly, that's right, rescuing me.
It's okay.
So the fact is that that's what the science tells us is not represented in the public information available. And if we're going to think about efficient use of our food, then we should really be prepared to understand the science of what cooking does. Of course, in terms of the nutrients, sometimes it goes in one way and sometimes it goes in another. There are some vitamins that are reduced by cooking, and there are others that are increased. So we need a whole lot more information about exactly how much the impact of cooking has affected us. And you asked about how long this has been going on. I mean, it's a matter of debate among anthropologists, but it certainly has gone on for 1 million years, and I think it made us human. I think it's gone back 2 million years.
How did it all start?
How did it all start?
Yeah.
Well,
we were sitting there by the fire.
Look, once you're sitting there by the fire, it would take about a week to figure out that you should cook all your food. We've tested all of the great apes and chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, bonobos. They all prefer their food cooked, but that's not unusual. All animals do. Dogs do, cats do, rats do, mice do. Every animal understands that their food perception system is adapted to seeing where the most energy comes from in their foods. So the question is, how did they get into contact with fire? And we need a time machine
by accident?
to figure that out. Yeah, right.
Might have been, because it gets more tasty.
Well, I mean, if you want to think about it, then very likely the way in which we interacted with fire first was to use it as a way to defend against predators. That meant we could come down from the trees and sleep on the ground. As soon as you're interacting with fire on a regular basis, then very quickly food would fall into the fire and you would realize that this is worth perpetuating.
It's worth it. And Christiane, the book you have written, did you bring it?
Oh no, it's my.
It's back there.
We all have written books, so we can't.
You have written so many books, but
no.
But this is a cookbook.
I know. That's what I wanted you to tell us.
Yeah, I'm an amateur in cooking, and I'm a scientist, but I love to cook, and I like to cook for guests. And frequently I have dinner parties where I invite people who I'd like to join me, and friends who want to talk, or also colleagues who I want to bring together at one table to solve difficult problems. And the food has a wonderful ability to make them sort of smiling and enjoying and being on a better mood. And I think this is the essential thing of eating together, is having interesting conversations stimulated by sharing something, by sharing a common meal. And I think that is a very, very important social
May I ask you, did you do this before you received the Nobel Prize? So it was actually a success factor?
No, I grew up in a family with many children. We had regular meals together, and the meals were sort of formalized. We had to be quiet. We had our soup together, and then we had good conversations. And I thought that was really important. And I try to keep that up in my lab, for example, when I invite my people for sometimes a party when they celebrate thesis defense, or when we have a visitor or so. And it's often a really entertaining and very important
But isn't this
event.
like you need to spend the whole afternoon in the kitchen because you've invited your colleagues home?
My cookbook actually is, the topic is simple food for special occasions. This is the subtitle. Meaning that you have to be able to cook something which doesn't embarrass your guests, because they think, oh God, this poor woman spent all the time in the kitchen. And also when the guests come, you must not be nervous. You must be sort of as if you hadn't done anything, because it would also spoil the atmosphere if you spend too much effort or too much.
You actually write in the foreword of your book here, I take it in English, at dinner invitations, the most important things is that people are in good mood and have pleasurable and interesting conversations.
Yeah,
so this is it.
This is the point. Yeah, and when you're running around and rushing around saying, oh God, it's cooked and, it's burned and apologize all the time, this is embarrassing for people. So you shouldn't do that. One should just enjoy it.
Thank you. You make it seem so easy. But please, Claude Fischler, can you now comment on what we've heard from your perspective? I would like to call you an expert now on.
Oh, an
on
expert. Well,
yeah.
I'd like to start. I could ask you a question. You said you like to cook for friends. This is not a daily occasion, it's an extraordinary occasion. You invite people. Now, what happens if someone doesn't like what you're cooking? How do you feel about that?
I try to find out beforehand. And
so she's the perfect hostess after all.
People, are they vegetarians? And I try to, if they are vegetarians, I try to make a vegetarian meal for everyone because I find it embarrassing if people get their extra things. Okay. So I try to find out. And I usually have, I think mostly, yeah, I don't think I had these kind of disappointments.
My question was not exactly that. But suppose someone you've invited and you've taken all the precautions as to what their diet is and their dietary requirements, and then for some reason they don't finish their plate or they obviously don't like it. How do you feel?
Has never happened.
Very, very rarely, but sometimes I'm offended, and I think it's not done.
My point exactly.
So when you're invited, you eat what you get.
There we are.
Exactly. So that's a pretty relatively. I mean, anthropologists are always uncomfortable saying a sentence like "this is a universal trait," because there's always someone that will come up with a. Mary Douglas once told me, there's always someone in the room that will say, "Excuse me, but I'm working with the bongos, and it's not at all the case." But generally speaking, what you describe is typically for instance, I got an answer from an interviewee in a survey, and she said, "Oh, if someone doesn't like what I cook for them, it's like, I want to give them a kiss, and they turn their cheek away." It's just a refusal. Now, isn't it interesting?
Because you share something.
Isn't it interesting that we now have apparently a growing number of cases in which, admittedly, there is an exception to this rule. That is, you go to someone, and instead of, by default, accepting to eat what they're going to give you, you convey your preferences or restrictions or whatever. The reciprocity is gone in that case. And what happened? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I mean, I'm just observing. So it's different from country to country. In my country, for instance, about 3% people, when asked, say, "I'm a vegetarian." We saw here today 23% in this audience. We know that in Britain it's about usually 12% or even more. So there are huge differences. And basically, we are thinking increasingly in the Western developed world in terms of individuals making choices. And come to think of it, it's an entire novelty. I mean, choice is a recent invention.
And it's not the place where you should have that choice. Is that what you say? You should actually...
I'm not saying what you should or shouldn't do. I'm trying to observe. And the difference is, for instance, in a recent poll, the French sample was asked, what do you do? Exactly what I asked. What do you do if you're invited at someone's and you don't like what is served to you? And 68% say, "I force myself." Now, we are
polite.
Similar questions asked to Americans and to other people, so whether they're sincere or not, but we get very different answers.
Yeah.
And
so what can we learn from this when it comes to how important it is to eat together and prepare meals together? What do you say, Christiane?
Well, I think we have to realize that we are in a changing world, and there are some assumptions, including some things that have been said today. We make it sound pretty often that it's all a matter of getting more choices, more options, and being more autonomous and freer. And what we observe is that in countries where there is this autonomy, and we're not going to criticize autonomy, I think it's a conquest. But it comes with problems. And people have a hard time making choices. They keep hearing about the right choice, the healthy choice.
So
you
this
know,
is
there's
why
a
we don't-
cacophony of advice and recommendations around, and we have a hard time dealing with this.
We don't prioritize this.
Well, I think in Western countries where people really have have all choices of food, they are much too much concerned about the health of the food. I mean, they
So
talk
that limits
about.
us
I
in a
mean,
way.
these discussions about whether sugar is good or bad, or whether we should eat more this or that, and then some people come and say, "I don't eat, I don't eat cereals, or I don't eat sugar, or something." I think it's overdone. I mean, it's because we are too rich, you know. And I mean, when I grew up, food was something really wonderful, and I was always hungry. I always ate too much, and I think it's just maybe it's my upbringing, but I think it's very bad manners to
But this is
be so
changing now in
picky
front
about
of
things
us.
which are
Yeah.
But people have so many concerns, and that it must be free of this and free of that, and you know, and they have read something in the newspaper that fungi are dangerous and celery is bad, and you know, and these things, and I think it's totally unnatural.
What do you say, Richard, about this from your point of view?
Well, the point about autonomy in food choice, I think, is part of a larger issue about autonomy in eating. Autonomy in the topic of this thing, the extent to which we eat together or alone.
Right.
And
we could eat together, actually.
I'm impressed by Claude's point that the whole concept of having choice about this is relatively novel.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, if we think about our evolutionary psychology, we grew up in small-scale societies where people always ate together. And what I love about the work that's been done on that in terms of education, which is emerging repeatedly today as such an important theme about how we modify our food systems of the future, is that education goes on around the meals and around the campfires. So when the anthropologist Polly Wiesner looked at what people talk about in small-scale societies, then by day they talk about practical things, economic things, maybe a little bit of social sanctioning to stop people doing the wrong thing. But then comes the meal and people sitting around the fire. And that is when people start reflecting in an entirely different way. Now they tell stories. Now they tell myths. Now they reconstitute the cultural institutions. And in our terms, you know, they would be thinking about things that's important for the society. And in ways that are often enthralling and exciting, stories are told that engender a sense of unity and a sense of commitment to the future, which in many ways we're lacking by our autonomy. If we go off and eat alone, which of course in small-scale society you're regarded as mad or depressed if you want to eat alone, but if we do that, we miss so much opportunity for bonding around the meal.
And you know what? During this little conversation that is now about to end, I'm afraid, we have been served some food. But it didn't really work because we were...
We're talking.
It's because I
have our discussion.
I cannot bring myself to eat something in front of an audience of 1,000 people
But you have lunch
who are
now.
actually starving.
Well,
They have lunch now.
stay
be the
seated.
last-
Yeah, you're too polite. You should tuck in. Katja palm down made it for you to enjoy. So,
Bon appétit.
please. And in fact, it would be very good
All
if
right,
you did.
so
because
I'll force myself.
please do, because thank you so much, all of you. And